Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of origin, recorder of videos, and a tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series. We take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, I'll be reviewing the adventure Snake Among Serpents, designed by Vincent Oscar for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my content, consider using my affiliate links for your online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/Rogue Watson. Snake Among Serpents is a 5th level adventure. I debate about using the term mini adventure or not. I feel like most adventures are kind of smaller, bite-sized, because otherwise you just compare it to like big campaigns. It's nothing near like a Lost Mine of Fendour, for example. I guess I consider it a mini adventure, but I really like the story involved in this adventure. It's inspired by Far Eastern themes, Orientalism, I guess, and I am the wrong person to ask if you would come to me and say, "Hey, Eric, can I make a adventure based on a Far Eastern influence?" I would say, I guess so. I don't. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. I think you just need to avoid, falling into like racist tropes and caricatures and that sort of thing. And sometimes we may not even be aware of those things. And there are, people that can help us out with that. I guess the term sensitivity reader, which is kind of a lame term, but that it helps be able to realize that. And I will say refreshingly, because that was one of the concerns I had going into this, is like, oh man, this is such a obviously blatant inspiration. And I guess specifically Japanese, because we've got the rising sun throughout. How does that play into this adventure? And I'm pleased to report that I think it's fine. I didn't see anything offensive about it, and from what I can tell, it avoids all, a lot of the more obvious tropes and cliches, to the point of fact where I think it's kind of the only stuff that it really draws from is it's a small village in danger, which, I guess that's Seven Samurai, and you could trace it back to, but I don't know if that is specifically even a Far Eastern trope, because I mean, a lot of adventures are just help our villages in trouble, help us. It's just kind of an RPG thing almost in general at this point. And the fact that it's a farming village with, rice paddies instead of wheat fields. And then all the characters, have Asian names and things of that nature. And I guess there's like a war going on. It technically, you can set it in Karatur, which I believe is the Faerun equivalent of the Far East. And I don't know about all the history involved there, but you don't have to. So you could actually take a lot of that out of this. But I think what's here works pretty well, and the artwork is really kind of cool. It's the cover image is the artwork that you get throughout, and I probably would have sprung for maybe a more fancier cover, but honestly, I think the artwork works really well throughout, kind of the black and white with a splash of red. I really enjoy it. It's also just really well put together, and like I said, I really do enjoy this story. It's a lot more grounded and cinematic than a lot of D&D adventures are. So I think that works really well. It's got like kind of multiple antagonists, and yes, obviously it's got a kind of snake theme, which it uses Yuan-Ti and Nagas in, I think, pretty cool, interesting ways, including kind of a twist at the end of the climax. Now, it doesn't really have a multiple act structure like Act 1. This happens, Act 2. This is very much not like an Adventurers League setup where it organizes it in that way. And yet, it has a very well put together adventure flow, I guess is what we call it, plot and adventure flow, where I could easily follow along, understand anything. I love the use of bullet points here, which is very helpful. And even it says, hey, we're gonna give you the whole plot, then we're gonna kind of break it down into plot points, and then we're gonna break the entire plot into these individual bullet points, and then here's the suggested adventure flow, which means here's the order of events that we think should happen. Even though, again, there's no act structure, I think it might have even gone a little too far into that non-linearity, because that makes it a little bit trickier for DMs to run the adventure, and especially at the climax, I think, is where I have a little bit of a complaint that I wish the adventure were a little more scripted, frankly, at the end, to create a kind of a cool climactic final encounter. But in terms of the overall plot, the main things you need to know is that this village has been recently occupied by a tyrannical army that sort of took over and now have, commandeered the entire village's food production into feeding the army. So they're under this, despotic rule, all the villagers, and the leader of the army, the general or captain, whatever the rank is, Captain Grinja, is a villain, but technically not the top villain, which is interesting. So you still have to kind of deal with that threat, but that's not the only problem. The other problem is that all the crops and things have been going bad recently. So that's problem number 2. And then problem number 3 is, by the way, this village is also nearby the sacred mountain called Cobra Head, which is home to a bunch of snake folk, and they leave everybody else alone, and there's kind of a mutual respect, understanding there that you don't come into our lands and we won't come into your lands. Well, lately a lot of snake folks have been coming into and basically being more aggressive with the village. So 3 problems that this poor village has to deal with, which is pretty compelling for the players. It's not just one plot that they have to follow the way through. However, of course, all of these plot threads do intertwine with one another into one major issue at the heart of everything, and that is the actual chief of the village has basically been pushed to his breaking point, and I'm gonna have to kind of jump around to story bits for a second, but he basically was able to acquire a young Naga, and he's using that young Naga to milk its venom, and he's poisoning his own crops, like his whole rice paddies. He's going out there with an accomplice and basically poisoning, because his whole thing is scorched earth. He's like, well, I'm sick of these soldiers and this army, and if we can't have our own food because they're just, got the iron gauntlet over us, then we're just going to poison the whole thing, and I'll have the whole village starve then. He's kind of lost his marbles. So he's actually the top villain, and he, as you can probably allude to where I'm going with this, of course, the young Naga is the son of the Queen Naga, who's at the Yuan Ti place, and so that's why they are starting to be more aggressive. And so you think, as the players, you're like, well, goodness, what's going on here, and why are they doing this? And maybe it's the army that's been, expanding into the Yuan Ti lands, and so they're coming out. So you've got this really interesting, what's going on, and I think the actual revelation, once you, of course, make it to the Yuan Ti lands and realize the truth of, hey, no, they stole our kid, and you need to get them back, is really cool. And there's also stuff that Yuan Ti are dealing with. I really like the way this is all put together, and structurally, it basically just throws you into the village, which you do get these nice little maps and handouts with that include all the key locations. So again, it doesn't have that act structure. It doesn't say, hey, act 1, you're going to meet on the road, and here's the village. It just says, hey, here's all the different elements, and you can choose to use whatever you like. I do love the way that we get these D6 event tables for every single location. They're super immersive. They really do a fun job of having scenes play out as if you were in watching a movie, and you would see these few little scenes that really add a lot to immersing yourself into the problems of the village and what's going on. So that they do a really great job with that. And then you also get this amazing, one of the best NPC breakdowns of any adventure I've probably seen. And I have reviewed some very story-heavy adventures that were murder mysteries and very heavy role-playing adventures that had to have good, dramatis personae and good NPC breakdowns. And this one is amazing, and it's not even necessarily has to be a big RP adventure, but I think the RP part of it is very, very well done. As I said, it's got, the chief who you can talk to, and, you might suspect he's kind of off his rocker. He's got an accomplice who he's blackmailed into helping him. There's the chief's son, who is the one that actually befriended the young Naga's son, I guess. And so he's actually wants to protect his son, but the son knows about the Naga thing, and the son, of course, feels very depressed about that. It's a very young son, 5 years old. You've got the evil tyrannical captain. You've got the the helpful priestess. You've got the surprisingly helpful witch who's helping, even though the villagers hate her. She's on their side. You've got this young kind of thug teenage rebellious group called Club Venom or something, Jeezy, who's of course they're actually or Clan Venom. They're a little bit, they suspect hey, maybe the snake folk aren't the ones that are behind this. Something else is going on. So there's a lot of really cool things going on, and they all include their relationships with each other, how to role play them, their whole backstory. It's very, very well done. The only thing that may be a little bit off is that you have to actually scroll to a different section after the story to get their stat blocks, the actual appendix section. So it kind of separates them. That's not the end of the world, but just an interesting way of organizing everything, is all their information, all the story information is before the story, which also means whenever you get to like, for example, when you get to the big meeting at the end of Yuan-Ti Temple with the Naga Queen, I was like, wait a minute, there's not enough information here to run this. And then I remembered, oh wait, you have to go all the way back to the section of her in the NPC section, actually read like, okay, how should I role play this and that? So again, not the end of the world, but it's a little bit of a quirky organizational because the NPC section is so big and thoroughly detailed. But generally, they should make it to the village. They should be able to talk with all these NPCs, kind of learn about all the different problems that are happening, and basically learn that, well, we're going to have to make our way out to the jungle, get to the mountain, and clearly, like, there's something going on with the snake folk, or we have to deal with them or something, which is basically what I would consider Act 2. So if I were to run this, I would have Act 1 be the whole village, discovery process. Act 2 be the Yuan-Ti thing, which is essentially, there's a little bit of events. There's a D12 table here as you find the path to the shrine, and then the shrine itself, which is kind of your dungeon crawl, is probably the only little bit of a bummer in this adventure, because folks who have watched my reviews know that I love a good dungeon crawl, and frankly, D&D is built for good dungeon crawls, and this is, I have mixed feelings about it, because I don't want to, it's very linear. I think that's my big problem with it. It's not a true dungeon crawl. It's basically you're going through a series of challenges. If you've played the Tomb of Annihilation adventure, maybe slight spoilers for the next like 30 seconds, but there's a part where you go to, gosh, I forgot the name of it now, but it's like a Naga shrine that I ended up redoing into a dungeon in my campaign, because as written, it was just a series of like, hey, you climb these steps and this happens, you climb these steps and this happened. It might as well just be an overland like random encounters, because there was no player choice to be made in terms of what direction we're going or what doors we're opening. It was just a series of events. And this is also, unfortunately, a series of events, which, again, that's not the end of the world, but when it comes to dungeon, that's what I like about dungeons, because you give the players the reins and they get a chance to actually explore and open which doors, and maybe there's an optional puzzle here, and there's a dangerous chest at the bottom of a well here, and there's different puzzles we can do, and kind of explore the space. But what we get here, what's here is really cool. There's some neat ideas here. There's a great bit where you have to figure out the puzzle of these statues and figure out what they're trying to make you do, and then you do them, and it's all optional, because if you manage to do them successfully, you basically gain an advantage trying to go through this poison-filled chamber, and if you fail at those, then you have to deal with the poison-filled chamber. And there's another really interesting one where there's this glowing egg in the middle that casts shadows on the wall, and these paintings come to life and attack your shadows, and you can't do anything until you realize the paintings are doing that. You just start taking damage, and you're supposed to even track like where the players are versus that's where the like shadows are and everything. That was just a really neat idea for like any dungeon crawl. I was like, oh, that's, yeah, I'd have it be like these. And then once you do realize and you start attacking the paintings, then they manifest as 3D figures and you actually fight the battle. So that's not even what the whole battle is. That's like the opening salvo that starts happening. You're like, what is going on? Then you figure it out, and then you can actually fight the true, these like shadow guardians. So it's all really cool ideas. But it's just a series of linear events, which I was really disappointed in, because I was like, oh, yay, we get to the, marquee dungeon crawl here, which still ends up being a cool twist on the story, because you get to the end and the queen is actually very nice. She's a good aligned Naga and just says, hey, these villagers, I don't actually think she knows the villagers stole her son, but she knows the snake, her son is missing. And the village is like probably the place that they would be at, I guess. And then her deal is she's got an evil sister who'd become a spirit Naga that she keeps banished for 24 hours. So for the last 100 years, every 24 hours, her sister comes back and she has to recast banishment. If the sister ever makes the save, then she's got Yuan-Tis there that can kill her. And then, eventually Nagas resurrect themselves. So then she casts banishment again. So she's kind of, chained to this place to where she has to keep doing that to keep her sister at bay, which I think is just a complete other, like, oh, this is just a neat thing you've added. And it adds a more interesting context if the players decide to attack the queen and just trade it like, well, let's just fight you all, because there's another story thread they can learn where, hey, we can cure the we can actually cure the rice patties if we get like a Naga's blood. So you're thinking, all right, well, we'll just solve it this way. Then you could possibly break her concentration on banishment, bring her spirit Naga sister in there, and then you've got a real problem. Or maybe you arrive when she's battling the spirit Naga sister, or maybe you arrive at, of course, the right dramatic DM moment where it happens to be near midnight and the sister appears, and you've got to deal with that. Just to have a cool like fight here at the end. I think that's just a cool thing that is included, even though it doesn't have anything to technically do with the main plot, but it's like why the Naga is like still here. But the idea is then you get the kind of twist information that like, oh, the chief of the village is actually the bad guy who's behind everything. He's got this poor young Naga like captured in a cage, and you have to go and confront him, and that will actually solve all the problems. The big issue I have at the end here, as much as I appreciate the fact that there is a whole page devoted to, how the end wraps up, but I would have liked, and again, I appreciate the more nonlinear structure of the whole adventure, but I think some kind of scripted ending would have really been helpful here, because otherwise it's like, hey, what do the players do? Do they just, try to defeat the evil captain guy and get rid of him because he's still a pain in the ass causing problems for the village? Do we expose, the evil chieftain, even though a lot of the villagers would actually side with him because he's been trying to be a good leader up until recently where he just kind of lost his marbles? How does the young Naga react? Obviously, he's still, a generally good aligned creature, but he's been interestingly put through this whole trauma. Like, how does that reflect upon this young impressionable creature? And how does that creature react to being freed? So I think it kind of sets up all these really interesting things to happen at the end, and then it doesn't quite give me enough. I hate to complain because a lot of adventures don't even do this much. They don't give you the full nice, ending epilogue breakdown like this one does, and yet I still feel like it needed a bit more. I think it mainly needed a nice climax, because more than likely the players are going to confront the chief, and it would have been nice, especially if some of the, if he's got loyalists or something, if they rise up against the players, and then do the players have a way of like exposing and finding out like where is the baby Naga, and then that can maybe convince the village, or maybe the village is like, oh, this is a cursed creature, we need to kill the creature, and then they have to defend the Naga, and then they have to turn on the village. Like, there's a lot more that could happen here, and this was the one area, as much as I really loved how detailed and well thought out this adventure was, this is the one area where I think the adventure kind of dropped the ball a little bit in giving me all the information that I needed to successfully run it. But honestly, I was very, very impressed with the entire story. As you can see, it's 50 some pages. That includes, again, all those detailed NPC breakdown notes and some new stat blocks, including some maps, which is cool, full color grid and non-gridded maps, which is always appreciated. So I think it's just a really impressive product. Let's go over my pros and cons for this really impressive product. Pro, interesting plot with satisfying twist and multiple antagonists. I love the story here. That's not usually something I can talk about when it comes to adventures. Usually they're kind of by the numbers. I might have one cool idea, but I just thought or usually they'll go too far into the backstory, and the backstory doesn't matter when it comes to the adventure. Everything mattered here. It doesn't get too into the weeds about its, big proper names or this long storied history or anything. It's just like, hey, here's what's important. Here's the story. It's all interesting. The UNT relationship stuff works. The chief's mental breakdown works, like why he's doing this, the evil captain, like it just, there's a lot going on, and yet you can do this in a couple sessions, I feel like, which is really impressive. Pro, multiple adventure hooks for player motivations. I think I actually skipped this over when I was doing my review, but there's a whole page here about the bullet points of different reasons the players may want to be involved. Maybe if you want to literally tie, especially if you wanted to make characters for this adventure, you could tie them into, certain events or backstories and provide proper motivations for the area. Pro, immersive event tables for each location. That's an awesome way of really making it come to life, and that is partly what creates this really cinematic backdrop and feeling to the world when you can just have these little scenes play out versus just kind of describing things generally and then having your players show up and having it all be through expository dialogue. Pro, extensive notes on over half a dozen important NPCs. My goodness, this has, again, one of the most impressive NPC breakdowns that I've seen, especially for an adventure that's not necessarily that role-playing heavy, but it could be if you want it to be, which I also like that it's kind of a balance of the three pillars of D&D. And finally, we do have full-color, gridded and non-gridded versions of just about every battle map you could want, I think. I don't know if it has, like here, this says it's a random encounter map for the Cobra Head area. I guess we don't have one for around the village. I don't know if you'd really need one. You do have one for the Chief's Manor, which could be where there's a final showdown, and then you've got some cool maps of the UNT Shrine. So again, that just always helps elevate the entire product when you provide cool maps. Cons. If you've been paying attention, you know both of them. I have the two cons. One is that I think the UNT Shrine Dungeon is just too linear. I think an easy fix would have been, especially instead of giving me these individual breakdown of rooms, just try to connect them and create a few offshoot paths, even though if some of them are dead ends or maybe an optional, treasure thing to find or something along the way. It doesn't make sense there to be like a random monster here because the UNT seem to have this place, pretty well locked up, but and you also want to be careful about not letting your players like necessarily fight their way all the way through. Although maybe there's an outer cave that, or just an extra cave section where some other creatures have gotten into. I don't know what you can do with it, but I would have appreciated at least some potential for the players to explore a space on their own and feel like they're making choices in terms of directions and maybe optional stuff. I still like the way the dungeon is designed, the parts that are here. I just wish it would have been a little more, branching path kind of style versus just a series of now you're in this room, now you're in this room, now you're in this room. And then my other con is I think the ending is a little disappointing in that it's a little too open-ended and kind of depends too much on the DM to do a lot of the heavy lifting, which obviously, we're always going to make some changes and do some modifications, but I would have preferred, it doesn't necessarily need like a final big boss battle, but some kind of final confrontation that would have had more, layers to it or something would have been appreciated versus just kind of saying like, yeah, the, players probably want to confront him and, the village will probably side with him. And then, there's the evil captain they have to deal with and all that. And it's just, I don't know. I appreciate that there was some work done, but I think this section needed to be a little bit longer, or just assume the players are going to do one thing, which is, side with the Naga and expose the chief. Give me all of that information pretty laid out in terms of like, hey, what's the final battle look like or the final confrontation? And then have a sidebar that's like, hey, if the players do decide to make these choices, here are the different variants that you can make. Final verdict. The grounded story, cinematic pacing, and perfect balance of combat, exploration, and role-playing, Snake Among Serpents is a refreshing adventure that utilizes serpentine foes in all new ways. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel and support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Shouts to Platinum patrons Joe, Will, Thomas, Stan, Brennan, Genocider, David, Eclectic, Roleplayer, Roll, Christopher, Brian, William, Corey, Coa1337, Big Nut, John, Chris, Scott, Gene, Eric, Dan, Tyler, Nathan, Camp, Crystal Lake, Counselor, Big Chef, Andrew, Daryl, The Real and Matt. Gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcus, Deadless, Lion, Sam, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Nathan, Fast Like a Tortoise, Scott, Ruffus, Caroline, William. Thank you all very much for your support.